Victoria Hamilton never imagined that a crumpled piece of paper written in Spanish could shatter the wall of ice she had built around her heart over the course of 38 years. That December morning, snow blanketed Manhattan like a white veil, hiding the flaws of the world's most ruthless city. Victoria was walking through the marble hall with Hamilton and Associates, the investment firm she had inherited from her father, when her footsteps echoed louder than usual. Maybe it was the unusual silence in the office, or maybe it was the weight of the words she had just read, written in shaky handwriting that looked like it had been traced with tears. Señora Victoria, mi corazón se está rompiendo. Usted no me conoce, pero yo la he visto crecer desde que era una niña pequeña. Su mamá me pidió que cuidara de usted si algo le pasara. Ahora tengo que ir y no puedo cumplir mi promesa. Perdone. Victoria's hands trembled as she read the note for the third time. The uneven handwriting spoke of urgent fear, maybe even desperation. At the bottom, a barely legible signature. Rosa Hernandez. Rose, the quiet gardener who had tended to the rooftop plants for over a decade. The small, dark-skinned woman who arrived before dawn and left after sunset, always with her head down, always whispering respectful greetings in broken English. Victoria had barely noticed all these years. To her, Rosa was just another outsourced work, replaceable, like any other cog in the corporate machine she ruled with an iron will. But now, holding that paper between her fingers, something stirred in Victoria's chest, a crack in the armor she had worn since her mother's death 20 years ago. Su mamá me pidió que cuidara de usted. How had Rosa known her mother? Eleanor Hamilton had died when Victoria was just 18, taken by an aggressive cancer that stole her final months in a hospital bed. Victoria remembered her mother as an elegant, distant woman, always concerned with appearance and preserving the family's social standing. She had never imagined her mother could have had any connection to an undocumented immigrant. Victoria walked over to the window of her 42nd floor office, staring down at the frantic pace of the city below. Tiny people rushed back and forth, each carrying their own invisible burden. For a moment, she wondered how many of those were like Rosa, unseen, undocumented, living in the shadows of a city that fed on their labor while denying their existence. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Margaret, her executive assistant, speaking with that efficient, icy tone Victoria had always appreciated. Ms. Hamilton, security is here. They need to speak with you about the cleaning staff member who was detained yesterday. Victoria's stomach clenched. Detained? Rosa Hernandez. Immigration. Seems like someone filed an anonymous report. Her knees bucked. She grabbed onto her desk, trying to process what she'd just heard. Rosa hadn't just been a gardener. She was also part of the night cleaning, and now she was in the hands of immigration, likely awaiting deportation. Where is she? Victoria asked, surprised by the urgency in her own voice. Elizabeth Detention Center in New Jersey. Ms. Hamilton, the company bears no legal responsibility. Ms. Hernandez was an outsourced worker, and Victoria hung up before Margaret could finish. Her hands shook as she carefully folded Rosa's note and placed it in her desk drawer, alongside other important corporate documents. And yet, somehow, that simple scrap of paper felt more valuable than all the multi-million-dollar contracts signed in recent years. She grabbed her Italian wool coat and left the office without a word to anyone. Inside the elevator, staring at her reflection in the polished mirror, Victoria barely recognized the woman looking back. Her once cold, calculated blue eyes were now red. A single tear slid down her perfectly made-up face, leaving a salty trail she didn't remember shedding since her mother's funeral. Her driver, James, looked surprised when Victoria gave him the address of the detention center instead of the five-star restaurant where she usually had lunch. Are you sure, Ms. Hamilton? It's not the safest area. I'm sure. Closing her eyes and resting her head against the leather seat. During the 40-minute ride across the Hudson, Victoria tried to make sense of what she was feeling. For the first time in 2 decades, the walls she had built around her heart were starting to collapse. She couldn't stop thinking about Rosa's trembling handwriting or the words about her mother. There were secrets buried in the Hamilton family's past, and Rosa might be the only one alive who knew the truth. When they finally reached the detention center, a gray, soulless building wrapped in barbed wire, Victoria shivered, and it had nothing to do with the December cold. Inside those impersonal walls was the woman who might hold the answers to questions Victoria didn't even know she needed to ask. Before stepping out of the car, she looked once more at the crumpled note. The words in Spanish seemed to pulse on the page, alive with a pain that crossed languages and borders. For the first time in 20 years, Victoria Hamilton was about to learn that some things matter more than quarterly profit and corporate merger. She was about to learn that some promises are worth more than contracts, and that love sometimes reveals itself in the quiet, most invisible act. Before we dive fully into this story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching now? Enjoy the story. The Elizabeth Detention Center smelled of cheap disinfectant and human despair. Victoria had never imagined she would step foot in a place, the narrow hallway, the faded, institutional green wall, the metallic echo of doors slamming in the distance. Every step Victoria took on the worn linoleum was a reminder there were entire worlds operating on the margins of her golden reality. At the front desk, a middle-aged woman chewed gum while typing with 2 fingers on a computer that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Her name tag read Linda, and the exhaustion in her eyes suggested she'd seen enough human tragedy for a lifetime. "I'm here to see Rosa Hernandez," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady. Linda stopped chewing and looked Victoria up and down. The Italian wool coat, the leather handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, the shoes that still gleamed under the harsh, fluorescent lighting. "You're a lawyer?" Victoria hesitated. What was she exactly? An indirect employer? A stranger driven by curiosity? "I'm someone who needs to speak with her." Linda let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Sweetheart, everybody here needs to speak with someone. You need paper. You family?" Victoria's heart sped up. She wasn't family. She wasn't a lawyer. She had no legal right to be there. But there was something in Rosa's note, something about her mother, that made every fiber of her being screamed he had to be there. "Please," Victoria said, and for the first time in years, that word left her lips without any calculated expectation of return. "It's about my mother." Rosa knew my mother. Maybe it was the raw honesty in Victoria's voice, or maybe Linda had seen so many broken families that she developed a radar for genuine pain. Either way, she sighed and pulled out a yellowed form. 15 minutes. Room 3, and don't get me fired. The visitation was even more depressing than the hallway. 4 scratched white plastic tables, chairs that looked like they came from a middle school cafeteria, and a barred window overlooking a concrete yard where nothing grew. Victoria waited, her hands sweating inside her leather glove. She didn't know what she was going to say to Rosa. She didn't even know why she was there. All she knew was that note had cracked something inside her, and she needed to understand what it was. When the door finally opened and Rosa walked in, escorted by a guard who looked like he'd been born bored, Victoria felt a jolt of recognition. Not physical recognition. Rosa had always been nearly invisible to her, but something emotional. There was something in Rosa's eyes that mirrored the pain Victoria had carried since her mother's death. Rosa stopped when she saw Victoria, her dark eyes widening with surprise, and something that looked like fear. "Senora Hamilton," she murmured, her hands trembling slightly. "Usted, por qué está aquí?" Victoria realized she didn't speak Spanish, and Rosa's English was limited. But in that moment, language barriers seemed irrelevant compared to the silent understanding that passed between them. 2 women carrying secrets, too heavy for words. "I got your note," Victoria said slowly, carefully enunciating each word. "About my mother, Elena Hamilton. You said she asked you to take care of." Rosa's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded eagerly, as if someone was finally asking the right question. "Si, su mamá, Elena." Rosa struggled to find the words in English, her hands gesturing in the air as if they could catch the meanings her voice couldn't express. She was buena, muy buena, kind. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Elena Hamilton kind? The mother she remembered had been elegant, yeah, but also obsessed with appearances, more concerned with charity events for the social visibility they brought than for the causes themselves. When did you meet my mother?" Rosa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Has mucho tiempo." "Long time. I was young, 17. Came here." She gestured vaguely, and Victoria understood she was talking about crossing the border. "No papeles, nothing. Sleeping in." She searched for the word. "The street?" Victoria off, her stomach tight. "See. Street. Your mama, she fine. Cold night. December, like today. She bring me to casa. How? Give me work. Give me." Rosa touched her chest, searching for the word that meant more than shelter or job. "Hope?" Victoria suggested, surprised at how easily she could read Rosa's body language. "See, hope. She give me hope." Victoria felt like she was meeting a completely different version of her mother. The Elena that Rosa described wasn't the cold, calculated woman she remembered. She was someone who took in undocumented immigrants from the streets. Freezing December night. "Why didn't you ever tell me that? You've worked in my building for 10 years. Rosa lowered her eye, her hands trembling on the table. "Su mama, she tell me to what? To care for you." But he struggled with the word. "But you was always angry, always sad. I no want to make more sad." Rosa's bruised brutal honesty hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. She had been angry. She had been sad. Even when she smiled at board meetings or social events, it was a mask to hide the emps she'd learned to wear like a second skin. You took care of, Victoria whispered. You were there every day, tending the plant, cleaning, and I never noticed. The plants, Rosa said, her eyes lighting up. Sumama loved plants. She teach me. She say, plants are like people, need water, need sun, need love. She say, Rosa, when I know can give love to Victoria, you give love to plants. Plants will remember. Tears stung Victoria's eye. All those mornings she'd arrived at the office and seen the perfectly tended rooftop garden. All those times she'd walked past the flower pots without a second thought. Rosa had been there, quietly honoring a promise to a dying mother. Was she sick when you met her? Rosa nodded sadly. Very sick, but she worry about, she say, Rosa, Mihija is going to be alone. She going to build wall. Please, if you can, help her remember that love exists. Rosa's words echoed in the silence of the visitation like a prophecy come true. Victoria had built wall. She had spent 20 years constructing an empire of ice around her heart, and Rosa had been there all along, silently trying to remind her that love still exists. Why are you being deported? Victoria asked, even though she already knew the answer would break. Someone call immigration. Say I no have papers. Say I am criminal. Rosa let out a bitter laugh. 20 years work, 20 years paying rent, buying food, sending money to mi familia in Mexico. But I am a criminal because I have no papers. Victoria clenched her fists. Someone had made an anonymous report. Someone had looked at Rosa, a woman who worked 16 hours a day, who never caused trouble, who quietly kept promises made to the dead, and decided she didn't deserve to be. How much time do you have? Deportation hearing in 3 days. No lawyer. No money for lawyer. Rosa shrugged with a resignation that broke Victoria's heart. I go back to Mexico. Maybe is better. Maybe is time. No, Victoria said, her voice firmer than she expected, even startling herself. You're not getting deported, not if I can help. Rosa stared at her in disbelief. But Senora, you understand. I am nobody. You are important, rich. Why you help? Victoria reached across the table and took Rosa's calloused hands in her. They were small hands, worn from decades of hard work, but there was a strength in them Victoria had never noticed before. Because my mother asked you to take care of, she said soft. You did. For 20 years you did. Now it's my turn to take care of. The guard knocked on the door, signaling that time was up, but as Victoria rose to leave, she knew she wasn't the same woman who had walked into that room 15 minutes early. Something had broken inside her, and through the crack, for the first time in decades, light was starting to pour in. Victoria Hamilton had never walked the halls of a law so much urgent. Her heels echoed through the polished marble of the 38th floor at Richardson & Partners, the most prestigious immigration law firm in Manhattan. It was nearly 7 p.m., but she had pulled every string she had to get an emergency meeting with Marcus Richardson, the senior partner known for taking on impossible cases for New York's elite. Marcus greeted her in his elegant office overlooking Central Park, a man in his 60s with perfectly combed gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than Rosa's annual salary. His sharp eyes assessed Victoria with the practiced precision of someone used to desperate clients in high places. Victoria, I wasn't expecting you on a Thursday night. Must be urgent. It's about a deportation, Victoria said, sitting in the leather chair across from his imposing desk. A woman who works in my building, Rosa Hernandez. Her hearing is in 3 days. Marcus raised his eyebrow. 3 days? That's not much time, even for me. And you said she works in your building. Is she directly employed by Hamilton and Associates? Outsourced. Cleaning and guard. Victoria saw the slight shift in his eye, the drop in interest. She recognized that look. It was the same one she'd given others when people spoke of replaceable work, but that doesn't matter. She needs help. Victoria, you realize immigration cases for outsourced workers are complicated, especially when there are no family ties or extraordinary circumstance. What exactly does this woman mean to you? The question hit Victoria like an arrow to the chest. What did Rosa mean to her? 48 hours ago, she hadn't even known the woman's full name, and now she was ready to spend tens of thousands of dollars to keep her in the country. Knew my mother, Victoria said fine. My mother helped her when she first arrived here over 20 years, and she's been taking care of me ever since, in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. Marcus leaned forward, his fingers interlocked on the desk. In what way? Victoria thought of the rooftop plant, always perfectly tended, flowers that mysteriously appeared on her desk during her hardest day, the invisible gestures she had overlooked for an entire decade. She made a promise to my dying mother, and she kept it quiet for 20 years. Something in Victoria's voice must have reached Mark because the hardness in his professional demeanor softened slightly. polite. All right, I'll see what I can do. But you have to understand, the odds are slim. If she's been undocumented for over 20 years, if someone filed an anonymous report, if there are no documented mitigating circumstances, what if there are? Victoria interrupts. What if I can prove she has deep ties to the community, that she's contributed to society in ways the system doesn't recognize? Marcus studied her, his interest visibly renewed. You have something in mind? Victoria didn't have anything concrete, just a growing certainty that Rosa held more secrets about her family than she'd shared in that cold detention room. Give me 24 hours, she said, rising from the chair, and prepare the paperwork. I'll find what we need. As she left Marcus's office, Victoria felt, for the first time in years, that she was fighting for something that truly mattered. It wasn't a corporate merger or a profitable investment. It was the life of a woman who had quietly upheld a sacred promise. Her first stop was the apartment she had once shared with her mother on the Upper East Side. After Elena's death, Victoria had kept the place exactly as it was, visiting once a month to make sure everything remained in order. The apartment was an elegant mausoleum, preserving memories she had never had the courage to fully face. Now, for the first time in 2 decades, Victoria opened drawers she hadn't touched in years, examined old photographs, and searched for clues about her mother's secret life, a life that had included helping undocumented immigrants on cold December night. In her mother's study, in a locked drawer whose key Victoria found tucked inside an old jewelry box, she discovered a treasure trove, family secret, letters written in Spanish, money transfer receipts to Mexico, photographs of Rose, a younger Rose, smiling beside Elena in the garden of the apartment. But it was a journal written in Elena's elegant handwriting that revealed the whole truth. December 15th, 1995. Found a young woman sleeping on a church bench today. She was shivering from the cold, spoke only Spanish, looked like she'd escaped something terrible. I brought her home. Victoria asked who she was, and I told her she was a distant cousin visiting for a few days. I couldn't tell her the truth, that sometimes God places lost angels in our path to remind us what really matters. December 20th, 1995. Rosa is helping in the garden. She has magic hands when it comes to plants. Victoria seems calmer when she's around, even if she pretends not to know. Rosa told me her story. She fled an abusive husband in Mexico, crossed the border alone, lost everything. Her eyes still shine when she talks about the children she left behind. January 3rd, 1996. I found Rosa a job with the cleaning company that services our building. She insists on paying rent to stay here, even though I told her she doesn't have to. Pride is universal, no matter the nationality. Victoria turned the pages with trembling hands. Each entry revealed a side of her mother she had never known, a compassionate woman who secretly helped other women in desperate situations. June 12, 1998. Rosa brought photos of her children today. 2 beautiful girls she hasn't seen in 3 years. She sent every penny she could save for their education. She says one day, once she gets her paper, she'll bring them here. Faith is a beautiful thing to witness. September 4th, 2001. My first chemotherapy was off. Victoria was at the office as usual. Rosa showed up with homemade soup and stayed with me all afternoon, holding my hand while I cried. We don't speak the same language fluent, but we understand the language of care. Tears fell onto the pages. Victoria read about her mother's final month. While she had been building her career, immersed in spreadsheets and board meetings, Rosa had been being the daughter Victoria couldn't. November 23rd, 2003. Doctors say I don't have much time. Rosa cries more than I do. I made her promise she would look after Victoria when I'm gone. Not in an obvious way. Victoria is far too proud to accept direct help, but in small ways, Victoria will need to be reminded that love exists, even when she forgets how to look. December 1st, 2003. Rosa brought new plants for the terrace today. She said plants have memory, that they remember kind, even when we're no longer around. Made sense. I asked her to take care of the plants in Victoria's office too. That way she'll be close, even if Victoria doesn't know it. The final entry was written in a shaky hand, clearly in Elena's final day. December 15th, 2003. 20 years to the day since I found Rosa in that church. That's no coincidence. God works in perfect circle. Rosa promised me she'll take care of Victoria. I don't know if Victoria will understand now, but one day she'll need Rosa as much as Rosa. True love sometimes takes decades to be recognized. Victoria closed the journal and allowed herself to cry for the first time since her mother's funeral. They weren't tears of grief, but of understanding. For 20 years, she had walked the halls of her company without knowing she was being silently cared for, protected by a promise made between 2 women who knew that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. Rosa wasn't just an outsourced worker her mother had once held. She was the sister Elena had chosen, the substitute daughter who had cared for her when Victoria was too busy to be present. And now, the silent guardian who had spent 2 decades keeping the memory of love alive through small, everyday acts. Victoria tucked the journal into her purse and looked out the apartment window. Outside, New York pulsed with its relentless energy, millions of people chasing individual dreams. But here, in this apartment filled with memory, she had discovered something money could never buy. She had been loved in ways she never knew existed, and now it was her turn to give back. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office with a determination her employees didn't recognize. There was something different in the way she walked the hall, less calculated, more urgent, as if every lost minute now cost more than any deal she'd ever closed. Margaret, her assistant, looked visibly confused when Victoria asked her to cancel all morning meetings and schedule an emergency call with the legal department. Ms. Hamilton, we have the investor presentation with the Japanese firm at 10. That deal's been in discussion for 6 months. Reschedule it, Victoria said without hesitation, and I want all contracts with third-party vendors on my desk within the hour. All of them. When Margaret left the office, clearly rattled, Victoria allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She opened the drawer where she had placed Rosa's note and her mother's journal. The words written 20 years earlier seemed to pulse from the page. Victoria will need to be reminded that love exists, even when she forgets how to look. The phone rang. It was Marcus Richard. Victoria, I've got bad news. I looked into Ms. Hernandez's case overnight. The anonymous report wasn't random. It came from someone with detailed knowledge, where she works, how long she's been there, even her home address. Victoria's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means it was targeted. Someone wanted her deported. And there's more. I found out she had a run-in with immigration about 10 years ago. She managed to avoid removal back then. But this time, Marcus, stop giving me problems. Give me solution. There was a pause on the line. The only real solution would be to prove she has close family ties to a U.S. citizen, or that she's at risk of persecution if sent back to her home country, or he hesitated. Or what? Or that she's provided extraordinary service to the American community, something that can be legally documented. Victoria thought of the journal, 20 years of quiet devotion, of the plants Rosa kept alive as living symbols of love. But how could she turn that into legal documentation? I need to see her again. Today, Victoria, they've limited visitation. Once a week, you've already used yours. And that's when Victoria felt her first real defeat since deciding to help Rosa. The system she had always navigated with ease was now working against money and influence, had limits when it came to human lives, trapped, bureaucratic machinery. She was still processing that frustration when Margaret knocked on the door, bringing in the contracts from the third-party vendor. Victoria spent the entire morning poring over docs, searching for any clue as to who could have had access to such specific information about Rose. On page 17 of the contract with Serve Clean Inc., the company responsible for building maintenance, she found something that made her blood run cold. A specific clause about monitoring of undocumented work and a phone number for anonymous tips related to immigration. Victoria picked up the phone and called Brad Morris, the CEO of Serve Clean Direct. Brad, I need to know who from your company filed a report about Rosa Hernandez. Victoria, you know I can't disclose anything about anonymous reports. It's company policy. Brad, Victoria said, her voice dropping into the tone she used to close multi-million-dollar deal. You have 3 contracts with Hamilton and Associates totaling over $2 million a year. Would you like me to have those contracts reviewed? There was a long pause on the other end. Let me check. 10 minutes later, Brad called back. It didn't come from anyone at my company. The report came from inside your building. Someone who knew very specific detail. Her work schedule, her home address, even information about her family in Mexico. The world spun around Victoria. Someone inside her own company had deliberately tried to destroy Rosa's life. Someone who worked alongside her every day had looked at the woman who quietly tended the plant and decided she didn't belong. She spent the rest of the afternoon investigating, using every tool at her disposal. She checked entry logs, security camera footage, call records. And finally, in a recording from the previous Thursday, she found it. The voice was unmistakable. Melissa Croft, Director of Human Resource, Hamilton and Associates, a 45-year-old woman, married with 2 kids in college, someone Victoria had always considered a model employee. I'd like to report an illegal immigrant working in the Hamilton and Associates building. Yeah, I have detailed information. Rosa Hernandez. She's been working here for years without pay. Victoria had to steady herself against the debt to keep from falling. Melissa had been with the company for 8 years. She knew Rosa, had even spoken to her in Spanish time, had always seemed cordial. Why would she do something like this? The answer came when Victoria accessed Melissa's corporate email, something she technically shouldn't do, but her position as CEO allowed it. In an exchange with her husband, she found the motive she was looking. It's getting too hard for Maria to find a job. All these places are filled with immigrants working for less. Maybe if some of them were gone. Maria was Melissa's daughter, a recent business school graduate looking for work, and Melissa had decided that Rosa, a woman who worked 16-hour days to send money to her daughters in Mexico, was standing in the way of her own child's opportunity. Victoria felt a kind of rage she had never experienced. It wasn't the cold, strategic anger she felt when a competitor tried to undercut a deal. This was hot, visceral. It came from a place deep inside her where injustice lived. She buzzed Margaret. "I want Melissa Crawford in my office now." When Melissa walked in, Victoria saw something in her eyes she'd never noticed before, a hardness she had once mistaken for professional efficiency. "Melissa, you filed a report against Rosa Hernandez with immigration." It wasn't a question. Melissa paled, but tried to remain composed. "I don't know what you're talking." Victoria turned the screen toward her and played the transcript of the call. "I have your voice on tape. I have your email. I have everything." Melissa collapsed into the chair, her hands trembling slightly. "Victoria, you don't understand. These people, they take jobs from America. My daughter's been unemployed for months, while Rosa cleans bathrooms at 5 in the morning." Victoria cut in. "Your daughter has a degree in business." Exactly what job did Rosa take from Maria? It's not just about the job. It's about order, rule. If everyone just gets to ignore the law. Victoria stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city teemed with people of every nationality, each one carrying their own story of struggle and hope. "Melissa, you're fired. Effective immediate." Melissa jumped to her feet. "You can't do that. I've been here for 8 years. I have rights." "You destroyed the life of a woman who spent 20 years quietly taking care of those around," Victoria said, her voice as cold as a New York winter. "Rosa made a promise to my dying mother and kept. You broke that chain of love out of petty jealousy. Get out." After Melissa left, Victoria sank into her chair and buried her face in her hand. She had found the person who betrayed Rosa, but it didn't change the fact that the deportation hearing was the next day. It didn't change the fact that a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others was sitting in a cold cell, waiting to be torn away from the only country she had called home for the past 20 years. That was when Victoria made the hardest decision of her corporate life. She picked up the phone and called Marcus's office. "Marcus, I want you to know, I'm willing to do anything to save Rosa. Anything." "Hey, Victoria, we've gone through all the legal options." "And the illegal one?" There was a long silence. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm saying I'm willing to put my company, my reputation, even my fortune on the line if I have to. Rosa cared for my family when there was no legal obligation to do so. Now it's my turn. If you believe there's something more important than money and social status, if you believe some promises are worth more than contracts, leave your comment below." Victoria and Rosa's story is just beginning. When Victoria hung up the phone, she knew she had crossed a line she couldn't return. For the first time in her life, she was about to learn the true cost of doing the right thing. The deportation hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Friday, and Victoria had woken up at 4, after barely 2 hours of sleep, broken by night visions of Rosa being dragged away as she screamed in a language Victoria couldn't understand. Marcus had called the night before. Devastating news. The judge assigned to the case was Harold Brennan, infamous for his hardline stance on undocumented immigrants. In the past 6 months, Brennan had ordered deportation 92% of the cases that crossed his desk. He wasn't just strict, he was immovable. "Victoria, you need to understand this isn't about money or connect," Marcus had said, with a brutal honesty she wasn't used to hearing. "Brennan can't be influenced, can't be pressured, and definitely can't be bought. He sees immigration cases as black and white matters of law and order, period." Now, sitting at her minimalist kitchen table as her coffee went cold, Victoria stared down the hardest decision of her life. Beside her mother's journal lay a business Marcus had given her only as a last resort. It was the number of a man, David Santos, a specialist in alternative solutions to immigration problems. Victoria knew exactly what that meant. David Santos wasn't a lawyer. He was someone who provided escape, forged documents, one-way tickets to countries with no extradition treaty. He belonged to a world the Victoria from a week ago wouldn't have even acknowledged. But the Victoria from a week ago didn't know she'd spent 20 years being quietly loved by a woman who had made a dying promise to her mother. At 6 a.m., Victoria made the decision that would change her life forever. She called David Santos. Mr. Santos, my name is Victoria Hamilton. Marcus Richardson gave me your con. The voice on the other end was careful, measured. Ms. Hamilton, I assume this is an urgent matter for you to be calling this urgent. It's about Rosa Hernandez. Her deportation hearing is at 9 a.m. today. I understand. And exactly what are you willing to do to prevent her deportation? The question hung in the air like a blade. Victoria knew she was about to cross a line from her orderly, lawful life to a shadowed world where the rules were different. Anything. And as those words left her lips, something broke inside her, not from pain, but from relief. Very well. I can get Ms. Hernandez out of the country before the hearing. Canada first, then maybe Mexico or another Central American country where she can restart with a new identity. It will cost $200,000. Victoria didn't blink. Done. But there's a problem. You'll need to disappear as well. Once they realize Ms. Hernandez is gone, they'll start investigating everyone close. Your visit to the detention center is already docked. You'll be the first suspect. Victoria's world stopped spinning. Leaving the country would mean abandoning everything she had built. Her company, her apartment, her entire life in Manhattan. It would mean becoming a fugitive, living in the shadow, just as Rosa had done for 2 decades. How long do I have to decide? The operation must happen before 7. After that, it'll be too late. Victoria looked at the clock. 6:15. She had 45 minutes to choose between the life she knew and the life her conscience was demanding she live. She hung up the phone and walked to the apartment window. Outside, New York was waking up with its relentless energy. People rushing to work, taxis honking, the city alive with individual ambitions and dreams of success. For 38 years, Victoria had been a part of that machine, feeding off its competitive drive, defining herself by the numbers in her bank. But as she watched the chaos below, she wondered how many of those chosen their lives out of fear instead of love. How many were trapped in existences they didn't really want, just because it felt safer than risking everything for something that truly mattered. The phone rang again. It was Margaret. Ms. Hamilton, the journalists are calling. Someone leaked the news about Melissa Crawford's termination. They want to know if there's a scandal in the company. Victoria hung up without replying. Of course it had leaked. In New York, corporate scandal was a valuable commodity, and the news that the city's most ruthless CEO had fired an employee for reporting an undocumented immigrant would be front-page material across every business publication. Her career, her reputation, it was all falling apart anyway. The only difference now was whether she'd be destroyed trying to save Rosa or destroyed as a passive spectator in her own life. Victoria walked back to the kitchen and opened her mother's journal to the last page. With the same pen she had once used to sign million-dollar contracts, she wrote, December 16th, 2023, 20 years after Mom's death, I finally understand what she was trying to teach. Rosa wasn't just caring for the plants. She was nurturing hope. Today, I choose to honor the promise they made to, even if it means losing everything I thought I want. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find who we really are. At 6:50 a.m., Victoria called David Santos back. I'm in, she said, but I want to change the plan. I don't want Rosa smuggled out of the country like a criminal. I want something different. Ms. Hamilton, I don't understand. I want you to organize a press conference. I want every media outlet in New York at the courthouse by 9 a.m. and I want Rosa to be released as publicly as possible. There was a long pause. That's not how we usually operate. It's going to cause a massive scandal. It will destroy your life. Victoria looked around one last time at the apartment that had been her sanctuary for so many years. The spotless white walls, the expensive furniture no one else had ever used, the elegant solitude she had mistaken for success. My life is already destroyed, she said. At least this time, it'll be destroyed doing the right. When Victoria left the apartment an hour later, she didn't bring the luggage. She carried only her mother's journal, Rosa's note, and a kind of determination never knew she had. For the first time in 2 decades, she had no idea where she'd sleep, but she knew exactly why it was worth not knowing. In the back of the cab on her way to the courthouse, she called James, her driver of 20 years. James, I need you to do something. Go to the office and take every single plant off the rooftop terrace, all of them, and replant them in the community garden at Riverside Park. Leave a note that says they are in memory of Eleanor Hamilton and in honor of Rosa Hernandez. James's voice trembled with emotion. It will be my honor, truly. Victoria hung up and closed her eyes. In less than an hour, she would stand before a judge, betting everything on a move that could either save Rosa or destroy them both. For the first time since her mother's death, felt she was living by value truly mattered. Love, she was learning, sometimes asks us to lose everything in order to gain it. If you've ever had to choose between safe and doing what's right, if you know that some battles are worth any sacrifice, leave a comment. Victoria was about to find out that there are only happen when you're willing to lose. The Manhattan Federal Immigration Court had never seen a scene like this. 8:45 a.m. Crowd of journalists, TV cameras and onlookers had gathered outside the cold stone building. David Santos had kept his word. Every major media outlet in New York was there, drawn by the promise of a story no one quite understood. Victoria arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, walking through the swarm of reporters, yelling questions pretended not to hear. She wore a plain black suit, not one of her usual tailored Italian cuts, but something she had bought from a department store the night before. She wanted to look human, not intimidating. "Ms. Hamilton, is it true you're spending your fortune to save an undocumented immigrant?" "Victoria, how do you respond to the allegations that you're harboring a fugitive?" "Ms. Hamilton, is your company being investigated for employing illegal work?" She didn't answer a single question, but her eyes searched instinctively for Rosa among the crowd. He didn't find her. Detainees were brought in through a separate end, far from the public chaos. Marcus Richardson was waiting at the courthouse door. Face was tense. He hadn't slept either. "Victoria, it's not too late to walk away. What you're about to do will have consequences far beyond this hearing." "I know," she said, resting her hand on the purse that held her mother's journal. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing." The courtroom was small, cold, and impersonal. Dark wooden bench, beige institutional wall, and at the back, presiding over it all, Judge Harold Brennan, a man in his early 60s whose face looked carved from the same grey stone as the building. When Rosa was brought in, shackled at the wrists, Victoria felt her heart shatter. The woman who had spent 20 years quietly caring for her family looked as if she had aged a decade in just 3 days. Her eyes, usually bright even in sadness, were dull now, resigned. When she saw Victoria, her lips moved silent. "Gracias." The immigration prosecutor, a young and ambitious named Robert Chen, presented the case with clinical efficiency. "Rosa Hernandez, 43 years old, in the country illegally for 22 years. No valid documentation, no proven familial ties to American citizens. A straightforward case of mandatory deportation." That's when Mark and the energy in the room shift. "Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence establishing the deep and extraordinary ties Ms. Hernandez has to the American community." Judge Brennan frowned. "Mr. Richardson, new evidence should have been submitted in advance." "Your Honor, this evidence only came to light in the last 48 hours. I'd like to call Victoria Hamilton, CEO of Hamilton & Associates, to the stand." A murmur rippled through the small court. Victoria stood, her legs trembling beneath, but she forced herself to walk forward with the same steadiness she used in boardrooms filled with hostile investors. When she was asked to swear to tell the truth, her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I do." "Ms. Hamilton," Marcus began, "what is your relationship to Ms. Hernandez?" Victoria looked directly at Rosa, who stared back with a mixture of hope and fear. "Rosa Hernandez made a promise to my dying mother 20 years ago, a promise she kept quiet for 2 decades. "What kind of promise?" Victoria took a deep breath. This was it, the moment where her old life ended and a new one began. "My mother, Eleanor Hamilton, was dying of cancer in December 2003. Rosa had been saved by my mother years earlier, after arriving in this country alone, fleeing domestic violence in Mexico. In my mother's final month, Rosa was the daughter I failed to be." She pulled the journal from her purse with steady hand. "Your Honor, I'd like to read a few passages from my mother's personal diary, entries that document not only her relation with Rosa, but also Rosa's extraordinary contribution to our family." Prosecutor Chen stood. "Objection. Hearsay evidence overruled," said Judge Brennan, his voice betraying a curiosity he was clearly trying to suppress. "You may continue, Ms. Hamilton." Victoria opened to the page she had marked the night before. "December 1st, 2003. Rosa brought new plants for the terrace today. She said plants have memory, that they remember kindness even when we're no longer around." It made sense. "I asked her to care for the plants in Victoria's office too. That way, she'll still be close, even if Victoria never knows." Her voice faltered on the next entry. "December 15th, 2003. Rosa promised she would take care of Victoria. I don't know if Victoria will understand now, but one day, she'll need Rosa just as much as Rosa needs her. True love sometimes takes decades to be recognized." Rosa was crying silent, her hands still cuffed pressed to her chest. "Ms. Hamilton," Judge Brennan said, his voice softer now, "are you telling this court that Ms. Hernandez cared for you for 20 years?" "Your Honor," Victoria replied, "for 20 years, I walked the halls of my company without knowing I was being silently cared for. Rosa came in before sunrise to tend to the plants my mother loved. She didn't just clean my office out of duty. She did it because she made a promise to a dying woman that she would keep love alive around, even when I was incapable of recognizing." He turned to Rosa. "She never missed a single day of work in 10 years. She sent every dollar she earned to her 2 daughters in Mexico so they could go to school. She learned English by whispering to herself, too afraid to draw attention. And when I finally discovered who she truly was, I realized I'd been loved in ways I didn't even know exist. And why? The judge asked. Are you willing to risk your reputation and your company to defend her? Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the promise she made in her kitchen. Because, Your Honor, Rosa taught me that family isn't defined by paperwork or legal status. It's defined by choice, by commitment, by a quiet kind of love that persists even when it's not acknowledged. Rosa chose our family 20 years ago. Now I choose her. Prosecutor Chen tried one last strategy. Your Honor, however touching this story may be, it doesn't change the fact that Ms. Hernandez violated immigration law for over 2 decades. Mr. Chen, Judge Brennan interrupted. For 20 years, Ms. Hernandez paid taxes using an individual taxpayer identification. She committed no crime. She contributed to the community in ways our laws may not formally recognize, but that clearly benefited American citizens. He turned to Rose. Ms. Hernandez, do you understand that if I grant you asylum or any form of relief, you will need to begin the process of legalizing your status immediately? Rosa nodded eagerly, her words coming out in a mix of English and Spanish. See, Your Honor, quiero. I want to be legal. I want to bring Miss Hija, my daughter. I want to be American, like Elena wanted. Judge Brennan remained silent for several long minutes, flipping through documents, scribbling notes. The tension in the room was so thick, even the journalists inside sat completely still. Finally, he looked up. In 23 years presiding over immigration, I've never seen a case quite like this. Ms. Hernandez clearly violated immigration law, but she has also demonstrated extraordinary community ties and exceptional moral character. Victoria held her breath. Given the unique circumstances of this case and the documentation presented establishing de facto family tie, I am granting Ms. Hernandez cancellation of removal and authorization to adjust her legal state. Removal proceedings are hereby suspended indefinitely. The courtroom erupted. Reporters raced to their phone. Rosa collapsed into tears. Marcus smiled for the first time in days, but Victoria simply sat down, heavy with the weight of what felt like an emotional marathon. When Rosa's handcuffs were removed, she ran to Victoria, and for the first time in 20 years, the two women embraced not as employer and employee, but as what they had always really been, family. Gracias, mi hija, Rosa whispered into Victoria's ear. Your mama would be proud. And in that moment, Victoria knew her mother was proud. It had taken 20 years, but she had finally learned the language of love Elena had tried to teach. If you believe some promises are worth more than any writ, if you understand that true family is chosen with the heart, leave a comment. Victoria and Rosa's story is coming to an end, but their life as a family just beginning. 3 months after the hearing that changed everything, Victoria sat at a small, cozy cafe in Queens, a neighborhood she had never once visited in her 38 years in New York. The cafe was called Esperanza, and it belonged to Maria Gonzalez, a Salvadoran immigrant who served the best coffee in the area. According to Rose, who now lived just 2 blocks away in a modest apartment, the transformation in Victoria's life had been as radical as it was painful. In the weeks that followed the hearing, the business media crucified the CEO who lost her mind, Hamilton and Associates in freefall. When philanthropy becomes fanaticism, the Japanese investors cancelled the 6-month deal. 3 major clients pulled their contract. The company's board voted unanimously to remove her as CEO. But while her corporate empire collapsed, something extraordinary happened in her personal life. For the first time since her mother's death, Victoria woke up each morning with a purpose that had nothing to do with numbers on a spreadsheet. Mija, Rosa said, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. You look worried. Preocupada. Victoria smiled, a real smile, one her employees at Hamilton and Associates had never seen. I'm not worried, Rosa. I'm just taking it all in. Over the past 3 months, Victoria had learned more about compassion and community than in all the years spent chasing success. Rosa had introduced her to the undocumented world of New York City, an entire society running parallel to the official, full of people working 2 or 3 jobs, sending money back to faraway family, living with dignity, even as they were treated as invisible. She had met Carmen, a Guatemalan nurse caring for elderly patients for $12 an hour, despite holding a nursing degree back home. She'd met a Syrian engineer who drove a cab through the Manhattan night while studying English during the day. She had heard dozens of stories like Rose, people who left everything behind for a chance, only to learn the American dream demanded sacrifices no one should ever have to make. Victoria, Rosa said, sitting down across. I have news about Miss Hijas. Victoria's eyes lit up. Rosa's daughters in Mexico had been a constant subject of conversation. Esperanza, now 22, had graduated from nursing with the money Rosa without fail. Carmen, 19, was finishing her degree to become a primary school teacher. Did Marcus get the visas? Victoria asked, referring to the family reunification requests the attorney had filed as soon as Rosa's legal status was approved. Rosa nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. They can come next month, after 22 years. Her voice broke. Victoria reached across the table and took Rosa's calloused hands in hers. For 22 years, Rosa had lived with the pain of being separated from her daughter. She had missed birthdays, graduation, first crush, all the little joys that define motherhood. Also, her girls could get an education, a shot at a better future. They'll stay with me until they find work, Rosa continued. Esperanza already has interviews at hospital. Carmen wants to teach. Victoria felt an idea form, not the kind of calculated idea she used to have about market gap, growth opportunity, but something soft, more human, something that came from the heart. Rosa, what if I told you I have a proposal for all of you? Rosa looked at her, curious. Proposal. Victoria took a deep breath. Over the past few weeks, she'd been developing a plan that would have once sounded crazy to her former self, but now made perfect sense to the woman she was becoming. I want to start a business, not an investment firm like Hamilton and Associates, something different. A company that connects qualified immigrant professionals with employers who value talent above documentation. Rosa furrowed her brow, trying to understand. Like employment agency? More than that. A bridge. There are thousands of people like Carmen and Ahmed in New York, doctors driving taxis, engineers cleaning off, teachers working in factories, and there are employers who desperately need talent but don't know how to find them. Victoria pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten notes. Imagine a platform where hospitals can find nurses like Esperanza, where schools can find teachers like your Carmen, where talent is valued no matter the accent, no matter the immigration story. Rosa's eyes widened. But Victoria, eso cuesta dinero. Much money. I sold my apartment on the Upper East Side last week, Victoria said calmly. I also sold the last of my Hamilton and Associates shares. I have enough capital to get started. And more important, I have something I never had, a real purpose. Rosa sat in silence for several long minutes, stirring her coffee, absent-minded. Finally, she looked up. Su mama, Elena, she would be so proud. I'd like you to be my partner, Victoria said, surprising even herself with the ease of the offer. You know this community better than anyone. You understand its need, its fear, its dream. I have business experience and corporate connection. Together, we could build something that truly mattered. Rosa stood abruptly and began pacing the small cafe, her hands gesturing, processed the offer. Other customers, mostly Latino immigrants grabbing coffee before their pre-dawn shifts, watched the conversation quiet. Victoria, Rosa said finally, I'm just a woman who cleans and plants flowers. You were important businesswoman. Rosa, Victoria replied, standing too. You're a woman who held a family together across 2 borders, who kept a sacred promise for 2 decades, who changed my life just by being who you are. If that doesn't qualify you to be my business partner, then I don't know what does. Rosa returned to the table and sat down, covering her face with her hand. I need to think, to pray, to talk with Miss Hios when they come. Of course, Victoria said. But Rosa, there's something you need to know. Whether or not you agree to the partner, I want Esperanza and Carmen to have everything they need to start fresh. I want to help with housing, interview, whatever they need, not as charity, but as family. Rosa looked up, tears now running freely. Why? After everything, why are you doing this for us? Victoria thought of the question she had heard hundreds of times over the past few months from journalists, former colleagues, members of New York's elite. Why had she thrown away a lucrative career for an undocumented immigrant? Why was she still wasting her fortune helping strangers? The answer had become clearer with each passing day. Because you taught me that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose, something you build, something you protect, even when it costs everything you have. For 20 years, you chose our family. Now I choose yours. That afternoon, as Victoria walked through the streets of Queens back toward the sub, she reflected on the irony of her journey. She had spent 2 decades accumulating wealth and power, thinking it would make her happy. Now, having lost nearly everything she once thought important, felt richer than ever. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. Victoria, 3 reporters called today asking about your new philanthropic project. How should I respond? Victoria typed her reply as she descended the subway steps. Tell them I'm busy learning that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how many lives you change for the better. When the train arrived, Victoria found a seat beside an elderly man reading a newspaper in Spanish. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel out of place or above anyone. She felt home. The company she was planning with Rosa might fail. It might not make money. It might become just another idealistic dream in a city that devours idealists. But for the first time in decades, Victoria was building something with her heart, not just her head. And that, she was discovering made all the difference. If you believe that true success is measured by the lives we touch, if you understand that the greatest wealth is the kind we share, leave a comment. Victoria is about to discover starting over may be the greatest victory of all. JFK Airport was busier than usual that April morning, but Victoria barely noticed the crowds around her. Her hands were trembling slightly as she held a handmade sign that read Esperanza y Carmen Hernandez in carefully drawn letters. Rosa stood beside her, wearing the nicest dress she owned, simple blue one she had bought just for this day, the day she would finally reunite with her daughters after 22 years apart. "Do you think they'll recognize me?" Rosa asked for the 10th time, her voice betraying the anxiety she tried to hide. Her hands kept smoothing the fabric of her dress, as if the motion could soothe the nerves tightening in her chest. Victoria looked at the woman who had become her family. Over the last 6 months since the court hearing, Rosa had changed, not just physically. She had gained weight, her face looked less tired, and her eyes now sparkled with a hope Victoria had never seen before. But the deeper transformation was emotional. Rosa was learning how to live without fear, how to speak English without shrinking her, how to dream of a future beyond mere survival. "Rosa, they're your daughter," Victoria said gently, placing a hand on her arm. "A mother's love isn't forgotten, no matter how many years go by." That's when they saw the two young women emerged from the international arrival. Esperanza, the older one, looked like a taller version of Rosa, the same bright dark eye, the same warm smile, but with the confidence of someone who'd grown up knowing she was loved, even from afar. Carmen, 2 years young, had lighter hair and a curious expression as she took in the American airport for the first time. The moment the three women saw each other was one of the most beautiful Victoria had ever witnessed. Rosa let out a cry from the depths of her soul, a sound that carried 2 decades of long guilt, unspoken love. Esperanza and Carmen ran toward their mother, and when they embraced in the middle of that crowded airport, they formed a circle of love so complete that the world around them momentarily disappeared. Victoria stepped back, giving the sacred family moment the space it deserved. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks. She thought of her own mother, of how Elena would have wept with joy to see this reunion. Every step that had led to this moment had started with one woman's compassion, a dying mother who chose to save a desperate young woman. Cold December night. "Mama," Esperanza whispered in Spanish, her hands gently touching Rosa's face, as if needing to confirm she was real. "I missed you so much." "My girl," Rosa replied, her voice cracking. "Forgive me for leaving. Forgive me for every birthday I missed. For every night I couldn't hold you when you had night." Carmen, who had been just a small child when Rosa left, seemed more reserved, but her eyes were filled with tears. "Mama, we understand. We always knew it was for us, so we could go to school, so we could have a better life." After the first emotional moment, Rosa remembered Victoria and turned to introduce her. "My daughter, I want you to meet someone very special. This is Victoria. She's the daughter of Elena, the woman who saved me when I first arrived. And now, Victoria saved me too." Esperanza and Carmen looked at her with curiosity. They had grown up hearing stories of Elena Hamilton, the mysterious woman who had given their mother a second chance when she needed it most. But Victoria was a surprise. "It's an honor to meet," Esperanza said in careful English. "Our mother told us about your family, about how Mrs. Elena was like an angel to her." Victoria felt her heart tight. "Elena, my mother, she would be so happy to see you here. She loved Rosa like a daughter. And now I understand why." During the ride from the airport to the apartment Victoria had helped Rosa furnish to welcome her daughter, the three women chatted in a warm mix of English and Spanish. Esperanza talked about her work as a nurse in Mexico, about how she had paid for college with the money Rosa. Carmen shared her dream of becoming a teacher and how she had long imagined the day she'd finally set foot in the United States. "Mama used to tell us stories about New York, Carmen, about the tall buildings, the snow, the plants she cared for on a beautiful terrace." Victoria smiled. "Those plants, they were special. Rosa tended the symbols of love. Every flower she planted was a prayer for you two." When they arrived at the apartment, a modest but cozy space in Queens, Esperanza and Carmen explored every corner with wonder. Victoria had helped Rosa decorate the home with photos of the girls she had kept for years and a few new plants on the small terrace. "It's perfect, Mama," Esperanza said, hugging Rosa again. "It's our home." That night, Victoria was invited to stay for dinner, the first of many meals she would share with the Hernandez family. As they ate tamales Carmen had learned to make from their grandmother in Mexico, Victoria watched the dynamic between mother and daughter. There was no resentment, no accusation, only mutual gratitude and a love that had endured across ocean decades. "Victoria, Esperanza said over dessert. Rosa told us about your plans for the new company, about helping people like us. Yes, Carmen added. We want to help too. Esperanza has experience in nurse. I can teach English or Spanish. Victoria looked over at Rosa, who was beaming with maternal pride. Actually, I was hoping you'd want to be involved. The company, our company, needs people who understand both what it means to be an immigrant and what it means to find your place in a new world. Rosa stood and walked to a small kitchen. She returned, carrying an envelope. Victoria immediately recognized it was made of the same paper as the note Rosa had left in her office months earlier. Mia, I want you to read, Rosa said, handing the envelope to Esperanza. Esperanza carefully opened it and pulled out a handwritten letter in Rosa's familiar script. She read it silently at first, then aloud for Carmen. My dear daughter, when you arrive in the United States, you will meet a woman named Victoria. She changed my life, just as your grandmother Elena changed my life many years ago. Victoria taught me that family is not just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stay when things get hard. She chose our family when she could have chosen safety. Now I hope you'll choose her too. I want us to truly be a family, all of us together. Victoria felt tears return to her eyes. For months, she had worried she was intruding on Rosa's life, that her help was accepted out of gratitude rather than true welcome. But now, hearing those words, she understood. Real love always makes room for more love. Carmen was the first to get up and kiss Victoria on the cheek. Welcome to the family, she said, with a smile that lit up the entire apartment. Esperanza followed, adding, Elena chose our mother. Our mother chose you. Now we choose all of together. Rosa began to cry, not the tears of sorrow she had shed so many times over the years, but tears of complete joy. For the first time in over 2 decades, her family was whole. And not just whole, it had grown to include a daughter of the heart, left in Rosa's care by Elena herself. That night, after Victoria returned to her small apartment in Queens, a far cry from the penthouse on the Upper East Side she had sold, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened her mother's journal one last time. On the final blank page, she wrote, Mom, today I finally understood what you meant about chosen family. Rosa didn't just keep her promise. She gave me a family I didn't know I needed. Esperanza and Carmen called me Aunt today. For the first time since you passed, I feel completely at peace. You planted seeds of love that bloomed in ways not even you could have imagined. I love you, and I know you're proud of all of. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm. But inside that little apartment, new family had been born, not from blood, but from choice, forgiveness, and the kind of love that transcends borders, language, and paperwork. And for the first time in 20 years, Victoria Hamilton fell asleep, knowing that the next day she would wake up not just to build a company, but to build a life her mother Elena would wholeheartedly and bless. If you believe that real family is chosen with the heart, if you understand that the most powerful love sometimes comes from the ties we create, not the ones we're born into, leave a comment below. Victoria and Rosa are about to discover that some love stories are too big to fit in just one generation. 6 months after the airport reunion, life had settled into a rhythm Victoria never imagined possible. Each morning, she woke up in her modest Queens apartment and walked 3 blocks to a small office on a busy street mostly frequented by immigrant families. The sign on the door, painted in both English and Spanish, read simply, Puente, connecting talent, building dreams. The company Victoria and Rosa had officially launched 2 months earlier was growing in unexpected and organic ways. What started as an idealistic dream was quickly becoming a real bridge between 2 worlds that rarely meet: the world of qualified immigrant professionals and the world of American employers desperately in need of their skill. Esperanza had become Puente's first official hire, using her experience as a nurse connect fellow Latin American healthcare workers, while hospitals willing to recognize their international credentials. In just 6 weeks, she had successfully placed 15 nurses and 3 doctors in roles that valued their actual expertise, not just their willingness to take underpaid jobs beneath their qualification. Carmen, meanwhile, had discovered a natural talent for communication. She was developing a cultural training program that prepared both employers and employees to work together more effectively. In the mornings, she taught technical English to immigrant professionals. In the afternoons, she led cultural sensitivity workshops for American companies. That October morning, Victoria watched the activity in the office with a kind of quiet joy she had never experienced experience during her years leading Hamilton and Associates. Ahmed, the Syrian engineer who now only drove his cab on week, was wrapping up a video interview with a Manhattan construction. Across the room, Carmen was explaining workplace cultural differences to a group of newly arrived Guatemalan teachers. Victoria, Rosa said, approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee from the small kitchen. I have new. In recent months, Rosa had bloomed in ways that surprised everyone. With her daughters by her side and the constant fear of deportation finally behind her, she had uncovered leaderships that had been buried under decades, forced invisibility. Now, she coordinated a vast network that spanned the immigrant communities of New York, gathering stories, identifying talent, building connections that changed lives. What news? Victoria asked, taking the coffee and noticing the excited spark in Rosa's eye. Remember Maria, the woman from Honduras we met last month? The one who worked as a janitor but had a master's degree in accounting? Victoria nodded. Maria Guadalupe was one of the most frustrating stories they had come across. An experienced accountant who cleaned offices at night because no American firm recognized her Honduran credentials. She got a job? Victoria asked. Hope. Rosa grinned, a smile so wide to brighten the entire office. Better than a job. She got a partnership with a small accounting firm in Brook. The owner, Mr. Johnson, said he'd never met someone so brilliant with numbers. Maria's going to help him expand the business to serve the Latino community. Victoria felt a wave of satisfaction, unlike anything she'd ever experienced in the corporate world. Closing million-dollar deals at Hamilton and Associates had given her a calculated, cerebral rush. But when stories like Maria's found resolution, the joy came from a deep, from knowing that a human life had been changed, that a gift had been recognized, that dignity had been restored. And there's more, Rosa said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. Carmen has an idea, a big idea. Carmen heard her name and walked over, momentarily pausing her clap. Victoria, I've been thinking, we're helping people find work. Yeah, but what about the people who want to start their own business? Victoria raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you mean? Look around. Carmen gestured at the bustling office. Ahmed has amazing ideas about sustainable construction. Maria knows more about accounting than most Americans. Rosa knows every single person's community and what they need. Carmen's right, Esperanza added, joining the conversation. In our country, many of us were entrepreneurs. We had small businesses. We knew how to make things work. But here, we become so afraid that we forget how to dream big. Victoria started to see where this was going. You're talking about a business incubator. Exactly. Carmen's eyes sparkled. An incubator for immigrant entrepreneurs. We offer training, connections, maybe small loans. Help people start businesses that serve both community, immigrant and American. Rosa nodded enthusiastic. Just like what Elena did for me, but bigger. She gave me a chance when no one else would. Now, we give chances to everyone. Victoria sat down in one of the plastic chairs that served as their conference room furniture, a stark contrast to the Italian leather chairs she once used. She considered the idea. It was ambitious, risky, and would require resources she wasn't sure they had. But it was also exactly the kind of idea Elena Hamilton would have embraced, the kind of project that honored the memory of a woman who had spent her final years saving those the system had forgotten. How much money would we need? Already knowing she'd do whatever it took. Not much to start, Rosa said. We already have the offer. We have credibility. We have the net. Maybe $50,000 for the first year. Cover costs, small loan, training material. Victoria thought about the money she still had from selling her belongings. It wasn't the fortune she once commanded at the height of her career with Hamilton and Associates, but it was enough to start something meaningful. There's one condition set, surprising even herself with how firm her voice. I want all 3 of you to be official part, not employee, not assistants. Part with equal share in profit and decision. Rosa looked stunned. Victoria, but you're putting up the money. Rosa, you gave your life. Esperanza brings her expertise. Carmen brings her vision. Money is only one part of a true part. That afternoon, the 4 women sat around the small table they used as a conference room and began sketching the plans for something none of them had imagined 6 months. Victoria used her corporate skills to structure the legal framework. Rosa contributed her deep understanding of the community. Esperanza brought her experience navigating American bureaucracy. Carmen offered her rare insight into how different cultures could work together productively. By the time they completed the first draft of the business, it was night, and the office was lit only by a flickering fluorescent light. Victoria Victoria looked at the three women who had become her family, felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine hope for the future. "You know what?" Rosa said suddenly. "Elena would be so proud. She planted one seed when she saved. Now look, it's becoming a whole forest." Victoria thought about Rosa's metaphor and realized just how perfect it was. Elena had planted a seed of compassion that had grown silently for 20 years. Now that seed was blossoming into a forest of opportunity, not just for one family, but for hundreds of families who would find new ways to flourish in a new land. They closed the office together walking through the streets of Queens as they discussed logistics, dreamed about possibilities, and laid the foundation not just for their own future, but for the futures of people they hadn't even met. Victoria, who had spent 2 decades living alone in a quiet Upper East Side apartment, now found herself at the heart of a loud, warm, and dream-filled family. When she got home that night, she called Marcus Richardson to share their new plan. "Victoria," Marcus said, after hearing about the business incubator, "are you sure you want to take on even more? You've already risked so much." "Marcus," Victoria interrupted, "for 20 years, I built wealth without purpose. Now I'm building limited resources, and I've never felt rich." After she hung up, Victoria realized she'd finally found what she had unconsciously been searching for her whole life, a mission greater than her fear, family she had chosen with her heart, and a legacy that would honor not just her mother's memory, but the dreams of every courageous soul who left everything behind in search of something better. Puentes wasn't just a company, it was a symbol that the walls between us and them are artificial, that talent and dignity don't have nationality, and that sometimes the most powerful partnerships are born when people from different worlds choose to build bridges instead of walls. If you believe the best businesses are the ones that transform lives, if you understand that true success is measured by the good we do in the world, leave a comment below. Victoria and her chosen family are about to discover that some stories never really, they simply turn into movement, inspiring others to write their own stories of courage. There was Ahmed, the Syrian engineer, now the owner of a sustainable construction company employing 12 people. Maria Guadalupe, the Honduran accountant, had expanded her Brooklyn partnership and now served over 200 Latino-owned small businesses. Carmen Garcia, a Salvadoran teacher they had met 6 months earlier, had opened a weekend English for entire immigrant family. But what touched Victoria the most was seeing Rosa in the front row, her eyes glowing with pride as she listened to the stories of success made possible through her net. Beside her, Esperanza and Carmen, now officially her business partners, handed out certificates of completion printed in both English and Spanish. When Elena found Rosa on that cold December night, Victoria said into the mic, her voice echoing through the packed hall, "She planted a seed none of us could have imagined would grow this much. Today, 25 years later, you are living proof that there are no small dreams, only people who haven't yet been given the chance to show their great." The audience applauded, but Victoria knew the numbers told only part of the story. In the past 2 years, Puentes had helped 187 immigrant professionals find jobs that truly recognized their qualifications. 43 had started their own business with microloans and mentoring. More than 500 families had participated in the cultural navigation work Carmen had developed, but those numbers didn't capture what Victoria had witnessed in recent months. Entire families learning to dream again, children watching their parents be respected for their skills for the first time in years, women like Rosa discovering they had voices worth listening to. After the ceremony, while helping to stack chairs and clean the room, something the old Victoria Hamilton would never have done, she was approached by a young woman she didn't immediately recognize. "Ms. Victoria, I'm Isabella Morales." Victoria studied the young woman's face, trying to place where they'd met. She looked about 25, dressed in a not professional suit, holding a folder that signaled seriousness and purpose. "I'm sorry, I don't remember. 2 years ago, you met my mama, Dolores, at one of the very first Puentes meetings. She used to clean offices at night back in Guatemala. She was a school teacher." The memory came flooding back. Dolores Morales had been one of the first women Rosa introduced to the Puentes project, a small, timid woman who spoke English in whisper, terrified of standing out. Victoria remembered her most because Dolores had cried through that entire first meet as if she couldn't believe anyone was interested in her teaching credentials. "Of course, I remember Dolores. How is she doing?" Isabella's smile lit up her whole face. "Mama is now teaching full-time at an elementary school in New Jersey with benefits. with respect. For the first time since we arrived, she feels dignified in her work. Victoria felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling she'd come to recognize as proof that a life had truly been changed, that a story of invisibility had become one of recognition. But I didn't come just to say thank you, Isabella added. I came to say I want to volunteer. I just graduated with a degree in business administration. I work at an accounting firm in Manhattan, and I want to give back. I want to help other families, just like Rosa and Carmen helped mine. That was the moment Victoria fully grasped the scale of what they had created. Puentes wasn't just a business or a social program. It was a living movement, a network of people who had been helped, now wanted to help others. A chain of generosity expanding in directions no one could have predicted. That night, after everyone had gone and the community center was quiet, Victoria, Rosa, Esperanza, and Carmen sat together at a tiny cafe next door, reflecting on the day's event. You know what? Rosa said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Today, I remembered something Elena told me when she was very sick. The other women leaned in. Any new memory of Elena Hamilton was treated like treasure. She said that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as problems. When I was scared of being deported, I thought my life was over. But if that hadn't happened, I never would have met you, Victoria. I never would have found my daughters again. I never would have discovered that I could make a difference in other people's lives. Victoria felt tears sting her eye, not from sadness, but from deep, overwhelming gratitude. You know what I've learned, Rosa? For 20 years, I thought success meant accumulating money and power. Now I know it means helping others discover their own power. Carmen, who had been quiet until then, suddenly lit up. Speaking of power, I have an idea. What if we expand? What if we take Puentes to other cities? Esperanza nodded enthusiastic. Yes, Boston, Philadelphia, maybe even Miami. There are so many communities that could benefit from what we've learned. Victoria looked at the three women who had become her family, and she felt that familiar rush. Not the competitive adrenaline of her corporate year, but the creative energy comes from building something bigger than yours. You do realize that would mean more risk, more work, less financial security. Victoria, Rosa interrupted with a knowing smile. Did you learn nothing in the past 3 years? Sometimes less security means more life. Sometimes the best risks are the ones that force us to grow. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood once again inside the federal immigration where it had all begun. But this time, she wasn't there as a defendant. She was there as a witness. A young Somali woman named Amina was facing deportation, and Puentes had been called to testify on her behalf about her character and her contributions to the community. When Victoria took the witness stand, she immediately recognized Judge Brennan, the same man who had presided over Rosa's case years before. He recognized her too. Ms. Hamilton, it's a pleasure to see you again. How is Ms. Hernandez? Rosa's doing well, Your Honor. In fact, she's here today. Victoria gestured toward the gallery, where Rosa sat beside Amina, holding her hand in silent support. And your organization, Puentes, correct? Yes, Your Honor. In the last 2 years, we've helped more than 500 people find employment or start their own business. Amina is one of our success stories. She started a small catering company serving authentic Somali food and already employs 4 people. Judge Brennan made a few notes, then looked up again. Ms. Hamilton, in the 5 years since I oversaw Ms. Hernandez's case, do you know how many similar cases have passed through this courtroom? Victoria paused. I don't know the exact number, Your Honor, but I do know that each one represents a family, a story, and untapped potential. Rosa taught me something important. There are no cases. There are only people who need a chance to show who they truly are. When the hearing ended, with Amina being granted permission to stay in the country, Victoria left the courthouse with the same profound sense of always felt justice and compassion. Rosa was waiting for her at the top of the courthouse step, just as she had 3 years earlier. But this time, her face was lit not with fear, with certainty. They had found a way to multiply the kind of miracle she herself had once received. Ready for the next adventure? Rosa asked, linking her arm through Victoria's as they walked toward the subway. Always, Victoria replied. For the first time in her life, that word carried only hope, with no fear attached. That night, Victoria opened her mother's journal for the last time and wrote on the final blank page, Mom, today I realize you didn't die, you transformed. Every life we touch through Puentes is an extension of the love you planted when you saved Rose. Every family we help reunite is an echo of the one you created when you chose to love beyond borders. We are all your daughters now. Rosa, Esperanza, Carmen, and the hundreds of women who have learned that family is chosen, dignity is built, and real love always finds a way to grow. See you soon, Mom. See you soon. The story of Victoria Hamilton and Rosa Hernandez began with a desperate note scribbled inside a cold detention. 3 years later, it had grown into a web of hope that spanned 5 states and touched thousands of lives. They had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. That real family is built from daily acts of love, and that the most powerful miracles often happen when we choose to become the miracle someone else's life. And somewhere, Eleanor Hamilton was smiling, knowing that the seed she planted on a cold December night had finally blossomed into an entire forest of possibility. We've reached the end of this emotional journey with Victoria and Rosa, two women who discovered that love knows no border and that true family chosen with the heart. Thank you for walking this path. What did you think of Victoria's transformation? Which part of this story touched you the most? If this story inspired you in any way, leave a comment and tell us the moment that moved you the most. And don't forget to share your ideas for our next story. We'd love to know what kind of story you'd like to hear. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of our emotional journeys. See you next time.